The incident and accusation. The small town of Crestwood was alive with its usual buzz of activity. Lush trees shaded the cobblestone square where children's laughter echoed, and street vendors called out with enthusiasm. At the center of it all sat Amara Johnson, a 19-year-old black college freshman, on a bench near the park's fountain. She had just completed a nerve-wracking but promising interview for an internship at a nonprofit focused on education equity, a dream opportunity. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, Amara exuded a quiet confidence, her braided hair neatly tied back. As she waited for her father to pick her up, she scrolled through her phone, reflecting on her answers during the interview. The tranquility of the moment was abruptly shattered when Officer Miranda Greaves, a 15-year veteran of the Crestwood Police Department, appeared. A stocky woman with an authoritative air, Officer Greaves was responding to a report of a theft at a nearby boutique. She scanned the square and zeroed in on Amara, sitting alone, her bag resting on the bench beside her. "Excuse me, young lady," Officer Greaves called out, her voice cutting through the hum of the square. Startled, Amara looked up. The officer's stern expression sent a wave of unease washing over her. "Yes." Amara replied cautiously, unsure why the officer was addressing her. "We've had a report of a theft in the area, and you matched the description of the suspect. I need to see your bag." Amara froze. "A theft? I've been sitting here for the past 20 minutes, waiting for my dad. I haven't done anything." Greaves crossed her arms and tilted her head. "That's what they all say. Hand over your bag." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. Her first instinct was to refuse, but the weight of the officer's gaze and the sudden attention from passers-by made her hesitate. She noticed a few people whispering to each other, their eyes darting between her and the officer. Feeling trapped, she picked up her bag and handed it over. Officer Greaves began rummaging through it, pulling out Amara's notebook, her wallet, and a travel-sized makeup kit. Amara clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears. This wasn't just about her belongings, it was about her dignity. "Is this really necessary?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. "I told you I haven't done anything." "Just following protocol," Greaves replied dismissively. The growing murmurs from the crowd heightened Amara's anxiety. She reached for her phone and called her father, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. "Dad, I need you to come to the square," she whispered. "A police officer is accusing me of stealing." Amara hung up, her hands trembling. She scanned the crowd, hoping for a friendly face, but saw only curiosity, judgment, and apathy. One woman whispered to her friend, while a man in a business suit shook his head and walked away. The whispers became louder, the stares more piercing. Amara felt exposed, as though every pair of eyes was dissecting her character. When Officer Greaves found nothing incriminating, she zipped up the bag and handed it back with an expression that betrayed no regret. "You're not off the hook yet," she said. "I'll need to take you to the station for questioning." Amara's jaw dropped. "What? You just went through my bag. There's nothing there. Why are you doing this to me?" "You match the description," Greaves repeated curtly. A young black woman carrying a large handbag. Amara felt her knees weaken. Her entire body vibrated with frustration and fear. "So, I'm guilty because of my skin color and my bag?" Before Officer Greaves could respond, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tension. "What is going on here?" Amara turned and saw her father, Gerald Johnson, striding toward them. At 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders and a firm jawline, Gerald was an imposing figure. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by an intensity that made the air around him seem to crackle. Gerald wasn't just any father, he was a respected civil rights advocate and attorney, known throughout the state for his work on racial justice cases. Today, though, he wasn't here as an attorney, he was here as a father defending his daughter. As he approached, the crowd shifted, creating a pathway for him as if sensing the gravity of his presence. Amara felt a surge of relief but also a pang of embarrassment. She hated that her father had to see her like this, humiliated, vulnerable, and stripped of her confidence. "Who are you?" Officer Greaves asked, her confidence faltering as Gerald locked eyes with her. "I'm her father," Gerald said, his voice steady but edged with anger. "And I'd like to know why you're accusing my daughter of theft." "She fits the description of a suspect," Greaves replied, though her voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness. "And what is this so-called description?" Gerald pressed, his tone unwavering. "A young black woman with a large handbag," Greaves admitted reluctantly. Gerald raised an eyebrow. "So, let me get this straight. You're detaining my daughter, rifling through her belongings, and subjecting her to public humiliation because she's black and carrying a handbag? Do you have any evidence, any at all, that links her to this theft?" Greaves shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Gerald said, stepping closer, his voice rising slightly. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass innocent young women based on flimsy, racially biased assumptions." The crowd, now completely silent, watched the exchange intently. Some nodded in agreement with Gerald's words, while others exchanged uneasy glances. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "He's right. This doesn't feel fair." Amara stood frozen, her emotions swinging between gratitude for her father's presence and frustration at the situation. Her pulse still raced, and her hands trembled, but seeing her father stand up for her ignited a flicker of hope. Officer Greaves straightened her posture, trying to reclaim her authority. "Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm taking her in for questioning." "No, you're not," Gerald replied firmly, stepping between Amara and the officer. "You've already violated her rights by searching her without probable cause. If you had any evidence, you would have presented it by now. Instead, all you have is prejudice." The officer faltered, her face reddening. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on her. "Sir, I may have made an error in judgment," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "An error?" Gerald repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You call this an error? You publicly humiliated my daughter, reduced her to a suspect in front of all these people, and now you think a half-hearted apology will make it right?" Officer Greaves looked down, her confidence shattered. Gerald stepped closer, his tone softening but remaining firm. "This isn't just about my daughter. It's about the systemic biases that allow situations like this to happen again and again. I suggest you reflect on that." As Gerald spoke, Amara felt a shift in the crowd. The whispers turned into murmurs of agreement, and a man at the back of the group clapped slowly, sparking a ripple of applause. For the first time since the ordeal began, Amara felt the weight of the moment start to lift. But she knew this was far from over. This wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about addressing the larger injustice that had unfolded before everyone's eyes. And as she stood beside her father, Amara resolved to turn her pain into power. Continue to parts 2 to 6, deepening the conflict, the community's involvement, and the journey toward justice and systemic change. The fallout and the fight. The square buzzed with tension as Officer Greaves stepped back, the weight of Gerald Johnson's words visibly affecting her. The officer muttered something indistinct into her radio and walked a few paces away, clearly flustered. Amara stood beside her father, her hands trembling, her mind racing with thoughts of everything that had just transpired. She wanted to leave, to retreat to the safety of home, but something in her father's posture told her they weren't going anywhere just yet. The crowd, which had begun to thin, lingered at the edges of the square. Conversations rippled through the onlookers, some murmuring about injustice, others defending the officer's actions. Amara overheard a man in a gray suit whisper, "She probably did something to look suspicious. Police don't just stop people for no reason." His companion, a young woman with braided hair, shot him a sharp look. "You really believe that?" she snapped, loud enough for others to hear. "Open your eyes. Amara's heart swelled at the woman's defense but quickly sank again as she looked at her father's face. Gerald's eyes scanned the scene, landing momentarily on every person still watching, as if gauging their reactions. Finally, he turned back to Amara, his tone calm but resolute. "We're not letting this slide," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "This isn't just about you, Amara. It's about every black person who's been targeted, humiliated, or dismissed without cause. You deserve justice." Amara nodded but felt a pang of doubt. "But what can we do? She already searched me, Dad. People saw. Even if we prove I didn't do anything, they'll still think I'm guilty." Gerald crouched slightly, looking his daughter in the eye. "Amara, listen to me. People like that officer count on us feeling powerless. But we're not powerless. You have a voice, and so do I. Together, we can make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Before Amara could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, Mr. Johnson." A middle-aged man in a plaid shirt and jeans stepped forward. He carried a leather satchel and wore an apologetic expression. "I saw the whole thing. I'm sorry for what your daughter went through. I'm a reporter for the Crestwood Gazette. If you'd like, I can help get your side of the story out." Gerald regarded the man carefully. "And what's your name?" he asked. "Tom Waters," the man replied, extending a hand. "I've covered stories on police conduct in the past. I'd like to help, but only if you're comfortable." Amara hesitated, unsure about making her humiliation public, but Gerald nodded. "Let's talk," he said. "The more people know about what happened here, the harder it'll be for this to be swept under the rug." Tom led them to a quieter corner of the square, setting up a small recording device on a picnic table. As they sat, Gerald recounted the events, his tone measured but firm. Amara added her own experience, describing the fear, the humiliation, and the isolation she felt as the officer rifled through her bag. "I couldn't believe it was happening," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've worked so hard to get where I am. I just finished an interview for an internship I've dreamed about for years. And in a matter of minutes, she made me feel like none of that mattered, like I was just another suspect." Tom nodded, his expression somber. "Thank you for sharing this," he said. "I'll make sure your story is told accurately." As they finished the interview, Officer Greaves returned, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Johnson," she began, avoiding eye contact with Amara. "I've spoken with my supervisor, and I'd like to formally apologize for how I handled this situation. I was responding to a call and made an assumption. That was wrong." Gerald folded his arms. "An apology is a start, Officer Greaves, but it's not enough. You publicly humiliated my daughter. What are you doing to ensure this doesn't happen again, to her or anyone else?" The officer hesitated, clearly unprepared for the question. I'll review the department's protocol," she said weakly. "We don't condone racial profiling." "Then why did it happen?" Gerald pressed, his voice rising slightly. "Why did you feel justified in treating my daughter like a criminal without any evidence? Saying you'll review protocol doesn't address the root of the problem." Greaves opened her mouth as if to respond but closed it again, visibly struggling to find the right words. Finally, she muttered, "I'll report this incident to my superiors." Gerald shook his head. "We're not waiting for internal reviews. This is bigger than you, Officer Greaves. My daughter deserves better, and this town deserves better." Amara watched the exchange, a mix of admiration and exhaustion washing over her. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see a young woman from the crowd, the same one who had spoken up earlier. "I just want to say I'm sorry you had to go through that," the woman said, her voice earnest. "If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." Amara managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." As the square began to empty, Gerald led Amara toward their car. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Amara broke the silence. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if nothing changes? What if this just becomes another story that people forget?" Gerald stopped and turned to face her, his expression softening. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Amara," he said. "But every step we take brings us closer. Today, we spoke up. Tomorrow, we keep fighting. And every time we fight, we're reminding the world that we won't be silenced." Amara nodded, her resolve strengthening. As they drove home, she realized that this fight wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about challenging a system that allowed assumptions and prejudices to dictate actions. It was about making sure no one else had to feel the way she did on that bench. She glanced at her father, his jaw set in determination. She wasn't sure what the next steps would be, but for the first time since the ordeal began, she felt hopeful. Together, they would turn this moment of pain into a catalyst for change. Continue to parts 3 to 6, delving deeper into the community's response, the legal and systemic battles Gerald and Amara face, and their ultimate journey toward justice. The rising tide. The next morning, Amara awoke to the sound of her father typing furiously on his laptop in the dining room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the scattered notes, legal documents, and news clippings covering the table. Gerald Johnson was a man on a mission. Amara rubbed her eyes and shuffled into the room. "Dad, have you even slept?" she asked, her voice still groggy. Gerald looked up briefly, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Not yet," he admitted. "I've been compiling everything, laws on unlawful searches, local police misconduct records, even your statement from last night. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" Amara asked, sliding into a chair. She grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, more out of habit than hunger. "For the backlash," Gerald said simply. "When you stand up to systems of power, they push back. Hard." Amara sighed. She appreciated her father's determination, but part of her wished they could just move on. The incident had left her emotionally drained, and the idea of reliving it over and over felt like picking at a wound that hadn't yet begun to heal. Before she could respond, Gerald's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Tom Waters, the reporter from yesterday," he said. "Let me take this." Amara listened as her father answered the call, his tone shifting from curious to serious in seconds. "What do you mean it's already online?" Gerald asked, his voice tight. "Who posted it?" Amara's stomach sank. She had a feeling she knew what was coming. As Gerald continued the call, she pulled out her phone and opened social media. Her worst fears were confirmed. A video of the confrontation in the square had gone viral overnight. Someone in the crowd had recorded the entire incident, and now it was everywhere, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok. The video showed Officer Greaves towering over Amara, rifling through her bag as the crowd murmured. It cut to Gerald's arrival, his commanding voice resonating as he demanded justice for his daughter. The caption read, "This is what systemic racism looks like. #Justice for Amara #Crestwood bias." Amara scrolled through the comments, her chest tightening. Some were supportive. "This is disgusting. That officer should be fired. Shout out to the dad for standing up for his daughter. We need more people like him." But others were less kind. "Typical race baiting. She probably did something to deserve it. Maybe if she didn't look suspicious, the cop wouldn't have stopped her." Amara slammed her phone down, her appetite gone. "It's everywhere, Dad," she said, her voice shaky. "People are commenting like they know me, like they know what happened. Some of them are calling me a liar." Gerald ended his call and sat down across from her. "I know this is overwhelming," he said gently. "But this could work in our favor. The video makes it impossible for them to deny what happened." Public pressure is a powerful tool. Amara wasn't convinced. It also means people are going to dissect everything I've ever done. What if they find something, anything, they can use against me? I don't want to be the face of this, Dad. I just want my life back. Gerald reached across the table and took her hand. I understand, Amara. But this fight chose us. And if we back down now, it sends a message that this kind of behavior is acceptable. We can't let that happen. Before Amara could respond, the doorbell rang. Gerald stood and opened the door to find a young man holding a camera and a microphone. Behind him was a woman clutching a notebook. Mr. Johnson, we're with Channel 8 News, the man said. We'd like to interview you and your daughter about yesterday's incident. The video has sparked a lot of discussion, and people want to hear your side. Gerald hesitated, glancing back at Amara. My daughter has been through a lot, he said. I'm not sure she's ready for that. Amara surprised herself by speaking up. I'll do it, she said, standing. Her voice was steady, though her legs felt like jelly. If people are already talking about me, I might as well make sure they hear the truth. The reporter nodded, visibly impressed by her resolve. Thank you, he said. We'll set up outside. Take your time. As Amara prepared for the interview, Gerald coached her on what to say. Stick to the facts, he advised. Don't let them bait you into saying something they can twist. And if you need me to step in, just give me a look. Amara nodded, her stomach churning. When she stepped outside, she saw a small crowd gathering on the sidewalk, neighbors, passers-by, even a few classmates from her college. The reporter began with a question that felt almost rehearsed. Amara, can you walk us through what happened yesterday? Amara took a deep breath. I was sitting in the park, waiting for my dad, when Officer Greaves approached me. She said I matched the description of a theft suspect and demanded to see my bag. I told her I hadn't done anything, but she searched my bag anyway, right there in front of everyone. She didn't find anything, but she still wanted to take me in for questioning. The reporter nodded. How did that make you feel? Humiliated, Amara said, her voice cracking slightly. I felt like no matter what I said, it didn't matter. She'd already decided I was guilty because of how I looked. It didn't matter that I was innocent. Gerald stepped in, his voice calm but firm. This isn't just about Amara, he said. It's about a system that allows officers to act on their biases without accountability. My daughter is lucky I was there to advocate for her, but what about the people who don't have that support? This is a systemic issue, and it needs to change. As the interview wrapped up, applause broke out from the onlookers. Amara felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The reporter thanked them and promised to air the segment that evening. Back inside, Amara sat on the couch, exhausted but resolute. What now? She asked. Now, Gerald said, sitting beside her, we organize. This isn't just about filing a complaint or getting an apology. It's about creating real change. We're going to push for mandatory bias training, stricter protocols on searches, and community oversight for the police department. Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't ask for this fight, but now that it had found her, she wasn't backing down. As her father began drafting a formal letter to the police department, Amara picked up her phone and typed out a post. Yesterday, I was publicly humiliated for no reason other than the color of my skin. But this isn't just about me. It's about a system that needs to change. I won't be silent, and I hope you won't either. #Justice for Amara. When she hit post, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she had a voice, and she was determined to use it. Continue to parts 4 to 6, focusing on the community rallying around Amara, the push for systemic change, and the personal growth she experiences as a result. A community awakens. Amara sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as the notifications piled up. Her post had gone viral, drawing thousands of reactions, shares, and comments. Some messages were supportive, filled with empathy and encouragement. Others were harsh, questioning her integrity or accusing her of seeking attention. She had prepared herself for backlash, but seeing the vitriol in writing stung nonetheless. Her father entered the room, carrying a stack of printed documents. "You holding up okay?" he asked, noticing the tension in her face. Amara nodded. "Yeah, I guess. It's just, a lot." She looked up at him. "Why do people hate so much when they don't even know you?" Gerald sighed, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's easier for some people to dismiss you than to confront the uncomfortable truth. Change scares them. But remember, for every hateful comment, there's someone who believes in what we're doing." The doorbell rang, cutting their conversation short. Gerald opened it to find Reverend Elijah Moore, the well-known pastor of Crestwood's largest church. Dressed in a sharp black suit and carrying a Bible under one arm, the Reverend smiled warmly. "Gerald, Amara," he greeted, stepping inside. "I came as soon as I heard. This town has needed a wake-up call for years, and it seems your story is the catalyst." Gerald motioned for him to sit. "We're glad to have your support, Reverend. The more voices we have, the harder it'll be for the system to ignore us." The Reverend nodded. "We're organizing a town hall at the church tomorrow evening. It's time for the community to come together and demand accountability from the police department. Amara, if you're comfortable, I think people would benefit from hearing your story firsthand." Amara's heart raced at the thought of speaking in front of a crowd, but she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. Reverend Moore smiled. "Your courage will inspire others." The town hall. The following evening, the church was packed. Rows of pews were filled with people from all walks of life, young activists, elderly churchgoers, local business owners, and students. Outside, more people gathered, unable to fit inside but eager to listen through open windows and speakers set up on the lawn. Amara sat in the front pew with her father, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her heart thudded in her chest as she glanced at the podium where she would soon stand. Gerald leaned over and whispered, "You've got this. Just speak from the heart." Reverend Moore took the stage first, his commanding presence quieting the murmurs of the crowd. "Good evening, friends," he began. "We're here tonight because an injustice occurred in our town, an injustice that reflects a deeper problem within our society. But we're also here because we believe in the power of community, in the power of change. Let us stand together and ensure that no one else in Crestwood has to experience what Amara did." The crowd erupted into applause, and Amara felt a swell of pride. When the Reverend called her name, she stood on shaky legs and made her way to the podium. The sea of faces staring back at her was overwhelming, but she took a deep breath and began. "Yesterday, I was just a college student waiting for my dad after an interview," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "I never thought I'd become the center of something like this. But when Officer Greaves accused me of theft without any evidence, I realized this wasn't just about me. It's about the assumptions people make because of how I look. It's about a system that allows those assumptions to turn into actions that strip people of their dignity." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I've read the hateful comments. I've seen the people who say, she must have done something to deserve it. But I didn't. And neither did the countless others who've been judged, targeted, or dismissed because of their race." Amara paused, scanning the crowd. "We deserve better. Not just me, not just my family, our entire community deserves better. And together, we can demand it." The applause that followed was deafening. Amara stepped back, her cheeks flushed, as the Reverend returned to the podium. Gerald gave her a thumbs up from the front row, his pride evident. Building momentum. Over the next few days, the momentum continued to build. Amara's story became a focal point for discussions on systemic racism and police accountability, not just in Crestwood but beyond. Local businesses hung signs in their windows reading, "We stand with Amara." Students at the nearby college organized a peaceful march, chanting, "Justice for Amara," as they walked through town. Gerald worked tirelessly, meeting with local leaders, writing op-eds for major newspapers, and connecting with civil rights organizations. Meanwhile, Amara found herself thrust into the role of an advocate, speaking at events and giving interviews to journalists who wanted to amplify her story. One afternoon, Amara received a message from a young girl named Tasha, a high school sophomore. It read, "Hi, Amara. I saw your story and wanted to say thank you. Something similar happened to me last year, but I was too scared to tell anyone. Seeing you stand up for yourself makes me feel like maybe I can, too." Amara stared at the message for a long time, tears welling in her eyes. She realized then that this fight was bigger than her, bigger than Crestwood. It was about creating a world where girls like Tasha wouldn't have to feel afraid. The opposition. Not everyone supported the movement. The police union released a statement defending Officer Greaves, claiming she had acted in good faith and followed department protocol. Anonymous flyers appeared around town, accusing Amara and her father of exploiting the situation for attention. Social media trolls flooded her inbox with hateful messages. One night, as Gerald and Amara sat in the living room going over their next steps, a brick shattered their front window. Amara screamed as glass rained onto the carpet. Gerald jumped up and ran outside, but whoever had thrown it was already gone. The police arrived shortly after, their response oddly subdued given the situation. Gerald watched them warily as they took a report, his distrust evident. When they left, he turned to Amara. "This is what I meant about backlash," he said. "But we won't let it scare us." Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. "If they think this will shut us up, they're wrong." Strength in numbers. Despite the challenges, the movement continued to grow. More people came forward with stories of racial profiling and police misconduct, each one adding fuel to the fire of change. A coalition of local organizations formed, calling for a full review of the police department's practices and the implementation of community oversight. Amara, once hesitant to speak out, became a powerful voice in the movement. At a rally held in the town square, she stood before a crowd of hundreds and said, "This isn't just about holding one officer accountable. It's about dismantling the systems that allow injustice to thrive. And we won't stop until we see real change." As the crowd cheered, Amara felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. She realized that her father had been right all along. When you stand up to systems of power, they push back. But with a community behind her, she was ready to push even harder. Continue to parts 5 to 6, focusing on the movement's tangible victories, personal growth for Amara, and a resolution that balances justice with the ongoing need for systemic change. The system fights back. The morning after the rally, Amara awoke to the sound of her father's voice on a conference call. His tone was sharp, measured, yet firm, the voice of a man negotiating with a room full of skeptics. She tiptoed into the living room, where Gerald paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, Chief Martinez," Gerald said, "you've made that point clear, but public trust in your department is crumbling. If you truly want to rebuild it, transparency is non-negotiable." Amara's heart sank. She could tell from her father's body language that the police department wasn't making things easy. They had issued a carefully worded statement the night before, promising an internal review of Officer Greaves' actions but stopping short of acknowledging racial profiling or offering an apology. To the movement, it felt like a slap in the face. After Gerald ended the call, Amara approached him. "How bad is it?" she asked. Gerald sighed and sank into a chair. "They're stonewalling," he said. "Chief Martinez is more worried about protecting his officers than addressing the root of the problem. They're hoping public interest will die down, that people will move on." Amara frowned. But we're not going to let that happen, right? Absolutely not, Gerald said, straightening. But we need more than protests and speeches. We need concrete demands, policies they can't ignore. That afternoon, Gerald and a group of community leaders met in their living room, brainstorming strategies. The group included Reverend Moore, local activist Maria Alvarez, and Professor Malik Harper, a sociologist from the nearby university. Together, they drafted a list of demands. Mandatory implicit bias training. All officers would be required to undergo regular training to address racial biases. Community Oversight Committee. A diverse group of civilians would review complaints against the police and provide input on departmental policies. Body camera accountability. Officers would be required to wear body cameras during all interactions, with strict consequences for failing to activate them. Public apology. Officer Greaves and the department would issue a formal apology to Amara and the community. Amara watched the discussion unfold, feeling both inspired and overwhelmed. These weren't just ideas, they were tangible steps toward change. But she also knew the police department wouldn't agree easily. The pressure mounts. As the demands were finalized, Gerald began reaching out to state and national civil rights organizations, amplifying the story beyond Crestwood. Soon, larger groups like the ACLU and NAACP were offering their support, helping to draft legal challenges and organizing resources for the movement. At the same time, local activists kept the pressure on. Maria Alvarez spearheaded a petition calling for the resignation of Officer Greaves. Within days, it had over 15,000 signatures, more than the population of Crestwood. Students from the university staged a sit-in at the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Amara," and "End racial profiling now." But the backlash grew just as fierce. Pro-police groups began organizing counter-rallies, claiming the movement was anti-law enforcement. Social media erupted with debates, some accusing Amara and Gerald of dividing the community, while others praised their courage. The tension reached a boiling point when Chief Martinez announced a town meeting to address the public. The announcement came with a caveat: no questions would be taken, and the meeting would be limited to 1 hour. "They're trying to control the narrative," Gerald said after reading the announcement. "But we'll be there, and we'll make our voices heard." Part 5, The System Fights Back. The morning after the rally, Amara awoke to the sound of her father's voice on a conference call. His tone was sharp, measured, yet firm, the voice of a man negotiating with a room full of skeptics. She tiptoed into the living room, where Gerald paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, Chief Martinez," Gerald said, "you've made that point clear, but public trust in your department is crumbling. If you truly want to rebuild it, transparency is non-negotiable." Amara's heart sank. She could tell from her father's body language that the police department wasn't making things easy. They had issued a carefully worded statement the night before, promising an internal review of Officer Greaves' actions but stopping short of acknowledging racial profiling or offering an apology. To the movement, it felt like a slap in the face. After Gerald ended the call, Amara approached him. "How bad is it?" she asked. Gerald sighed and sank into a chair. "They're stonewalling," he said. "Chief Martinez is more worried about protecting his officers than addressing the root of the problem. They're hoping public interest will die down, that people will move on." Amara frowned. "But we're not going to let that happen, right?" "Absolutely not," Gerald said, straightening. "But we need more than protests and speeches. We need concrete demands, policies they can't ignore." That afternoon, Gerald and a group of community leaders met in their living room, brainstorming strategies. The group included Reverend Moore, local activist Maria Alvarez, and Professor Malik Harper, a sociologist from the nearby university. Together, they drafted a list of demands. Mandatory implicit bias training. All officers would be required to undergo regular training to address racial biases. Community Oversight Committee. a diverse group of civilians would review complaints against the police and provide input on departmental policies. Body camera accountability. Officers would be required to wear body cameras during all interactions, with strict consequences for failing to activate them. Public apology. Officer Greaves and the department would issue a formal apology to Amara and the community. Amara watched the discussion unfold, feeling both inspired and overwhelmed. These weren't just ideas, they were tangible steps toward change. But she also knew the police department wouldn't agree easily. The pressure mounts. As the demands were finalized, Gerald began reaching out to state and national civil rights organizations, amplifying the story beyond Crestwood. Soon, larger groups like the ACLU and NAACP were offering their support, helping to draft legal challenges and organizing resources for the movement. At the same time, local activists kept the pressure on. Maria Alvarez spearheaded a petition calling for the resignation of Officer Greaves. Within days, it had over 15,000 signatures, more than the population of Crestwood. Students from the university staged a sit-in at the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Amara," and "End racial profiling now." But the backlash grew just as fierce. Pro-police groups began organizing counter-rallies, claiming the movement was anti-law enforcement. Social media erupted with debates, some accusing Amara and Gerald of dividing the community, while others praised their courage. The tension reached a boiling point when Chief Martinez announced a town meeting to address the public. The announcement came with a caveat: no questions would be taken, and the meeting would be limited to 1 hour. "They're trying to control the narrative," Gerald said after reading the announcement. "But we'll be there, and we'll make our voices heard." The town meeting. The meeting took place in the high school gymnasium, which was packed with residents, reporters, and police officers. Amara sat in the front row with her father, feeling the weight of the moment. Chief Martinez stood on the stage, flanked by other officers and town officials. He began with a prepared speech, emphasizing the department's commitment to fairness and integrity. "We take these allegations seriously," he said, his tone detached. "But it's important to remember that our officers put their lives on the line every day. We ask the community to trust that we will handle this matter appropriately." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Maria Alvarez, seated beside Amara, muttered under her breath, "What a joke." When Martinez concluded, he began to leave the stage, but Gerald stood and addressed him directly. "Chief Martinez," he called, his voice cutting through the noise. "You've said a lot about trust, but trust is earned through action, not words. What are you going to do to ensure this never happens again?" The room erupted in applause, forcing Martinez to pause. He returned to the microphone, clearly annoyed. "Mr. Johnson, we're conducting an internal review. That's all I can say at this time." "An internal review is not enough," Gerald pressed, his voice rising. "The community has spoken. We've presented clear, actionable demands. Are you willing to commit to them, or will you continue to ignore us?" The tension in the room was palpable. Martinez hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a direct challenge. "We'll take the demands under advisement," he said finally. Gerald didn't let up. "That's not good enough. The people of this town deserve accountability, not empty promises. Will you commit to a timeline for implementing these changes?" The crowd erupted again, chanting, "Answer him! Answer him!" Martinez looked to his colleagues for support, but their expressions were just as uncertain. "I'll discuss it with the mayor," he stammered, before hastily exiting the stage. A glimmer of hope. The meeting may not have provided immediate answers, but it marked a turning point. The community's unity and determination were impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, several town officials publicly expressed support for the movement, putting additional pressure on the police department to respond. Amara, meanwhile, found herself growing into her role as an advocate. She spoke at another rally, this time with more confidence. "We're not asking for special treatment," she said. "We're asking for fairness, for dignity, for basic human respect. And we won't stop until we get it." Her words resonated far beyond Crestwood. Media outlets across the country picked up the story, drawing attention to the movement's demands. Celebrities tweeted their support, and donations poured in to fund legal efforts and community initiatives. But the fight was far from over. Gerald received a call from one of his contacts at a civil rights organization, warning him that the police union was preparing a countersuit, claiming defamation and emotional distress on behalf of Officer Greaves. "They're trying to intimidate us," Gerald said after hanging up. "But we won't back down. If they want a legal battle, we'll give them one." Amara felt a pang of fear but quickly pushed it aside. She thought of all the people who had reached out to her, people like Tasha, who had found courage in her story. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, or dehumanized. "We'll fight," she said, her voice steady. "And we'll win." Continue to Part 6, resolving the legal and social battle, showcasing systemic victories, and highlighting the personal growth and transformation of Amara and her community. Victory and transformation. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Amara sat beside her father at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Officer Greaves sat stiffly, flanked by her lawyer and representatives from the police union. The countersuit against Gerald and Amara for defamation had become a flashpoint, drawing national attention. Gerald leaned over and whispered, "This is their last attempt to silence us. Stay strong." Amara nodded, but her heart raced. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, replaying every detail of her interaction with Officer Greaves. The legal team supporting them had argued that this wasn't just a personal grievance, it was a matter of public interest, a fight for accountability in a system resistant to change. As the judge called the session to order, Amara straightened her back and drew a steadying breath. She was ready. The legal battle. The proceedings stretched over several tense days. Officer Greaves' lawyer argued that the viral video and subsequent public backlash had caused her irreparable harm, claiming she had acted in good faith based on the description provided in the theft report. But Gerald dismantled their arguments with precision. He presented evidence of the department's history of racial profiling complaints, none of which had been resolved satisfactorily. He also called witnesses, including Reverend Moore and Maria Alvarez, who testified to the broader pattern of bias in Crestwood's policing practices. The turning point came when Amara took the stand. Facing a room filled with reporters, community members, and skeptics, she spoke with quiet but unshakable resolve. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said. "But when Officer Greaves stopped me, searched my bag, and treated me like a criminal, she made me part of it. This isn't just about me. It's about a system that makes people like me feel unsafe, unwelcome, and unworthy. I may be just one person, but I refuse to stay silent." Her testimony was met with murmurs of support from the gallery. Even the judge seemed moved, nodding slightly as Amara concluded. A hard-earned victory. After weeks of deliberation, the judge ruled in favor of Amara and Gerald, dismissing the countersuit and ordering the police department to release the findings of their internal review. The ruling was a decisive blow to the department's credibility and a significant victory for the movement. The celebrations that followed were both joyous and solemn. The town square filled with supporters holding candles and singing hymns. Amara stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by her father, Reverend Moore, and other leaders, as she addressed the crowd. "This victory isn't just mine," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. "It belongs to every person who stood up, spoke out, and refused to accept injustice as the status quo. Change is possible when we come together." The crowd erupted into cheers, the energy palpable. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting off her shoulders. Building a better future. In the months that followed, tangible change began to take shape in Crestwood. The police department adopted all of the movement's demands, starting with mandatory implicit bias training and the creation of a community oversight committee. Officer Greaves resigned quietly, her actions now a cautionary tale within the department. Amara returned to college but remained active in the fight for justice. She partnered with local organizations to create workshops for young people, teaching them about their rights and how to navigate encounters with law enforcement. Her internship at the nonprofit turned into a full-time position, where she worked to address systemic inequities in education. One afternoon, she received a letter from Tasha, the high school student who had reached out months earlier. It read, "Dear Amara. Thank you for being brave. Because of you, I told my story to my school counselor, and they're taking action to make sure no one else goes through what I did. You've inspired me to stand up for myself and others. I hope one day I can make a difference like you have." Tears filled Amara's eyes as she read the letter. It reminded her that the fight for justice wasn't just about large-scale reforms, it was about touching individual lives, one at a time. A new chapter. 1 year later, Amara stood in the same park where the incident had taken place. The town had organized a community festival to celebrate the progress they had made, and the atmosphere was filled with laughter and music. Gerald stood beside her, beaming with pride. "You've come a long way," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you." Amara smiled. "We've come a long way," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." As she looked around the square, she saw familiar faces, Reverend Moore chatting with Maria Alvarez, students from the university painting a mural, and police officers engaging positively with the community. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, but they had become a reminder of what could be achieved through persistence and unity. A little girl approached Amara, holding a sunflower. "Are you the lady from the videos?" she asked shyly. Amara knelt down to her level and smiled. "I guess I am," she said. "What's your name?" "Lila," the girl replied. "My mom says you're a hero." Amara's heart swelled. "Thank you, Lila. But you know, heroes don't do it alone. They always have help." Lila grinned and handed her the flower before running back to her mother. Amara stood, the sunflower in her hand, and looked out at the vibrant scene before her. This was her community, imperfect, resilient, and full of hope. The fight wasn't over, but Amara knew they were on the right path. Together, they had turned pain into progress, fear into courage, and division into unity. And she was ready for whatever came next. Epilogue. Months later, Amara received an award for her advocacy work, a testament to her role in sparking change in Crestwood and beyond. As she accepted the honor, she reflected on how a moment of injustice had transformed her life and the lives of so many others. Her journey was far from over, but she carried with her the lessons of the past and the hope of a brighter future.